الله الرحمن بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين أفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم انفعنا وانفع بنا يا كريم. So we in the last session we discussed regarding the hadith al-musalsal bil-awwaliyya, and we discussed the story as to how that tradition started. And inshallah, in this session, we have the text ready to go. But before I teach any text, I always tell my students that you have to be aware of the publisher or the publishing house that has printed the text that you are currently reading. Texts are not all printed the same. We have, behind me, texts from publishing houses which are, they're known to be people who take their work seriously. They're not just out there to make a profit. And the quality of their texts and the number of mistakes and errors found in their texts is quite minimal compared to other publishers who print for a profit. They're not out there to further the cause of scholarship and knowledge. They print Arabic texts, Islamic texts, with a lot of mistakes. Words are missing, words are printed wrong, and basically you have to be diligent as to who has printed your text, who has printed the book you are currently reading. And this will make sense when we read this short conversation with Sheikh Hussein Kadadiya, who is one of my teacher's teacher, and he's a well-known book expert. And when you read this, your eyes will be open for the first time as to the reality of Islamic texts and publishing houses. So khairan, let's dive straight into it. A while back, a number of ulama were discussing the different critical editions of a famous book of fiqh, upon which a dear friend and brilliant alim, Mufti Hussein Kadadiya of South Africa, made the following comments on Arabic manuscript research and publishing in the modern day. With his permission, and may Allah reward him, I am reproducing his letter here with slight changes made for the sake of clarification. Mufti Hussein, Hafidhahullah, writes, to understand different criticisms and comments about Darul Kutub al-Ilmiya. Darul Kutub al-Ilmiya is commonly known as DKI, is one of the popular publishing houses for a lot of books, including hadith, tafsir, qira'at, nahu, lugha, everything. One would first have to understand how these publishers work. So how do these people publish texts? How do they print them? Let's say, in the past, most of these publishers, for example, Darul Kutub al-Ilmiya, Darul Fikr, would just have a group of typists with one muhaqqiq, research scholar. So they'd have typists, people who type up the text on computer, and then they have one muhaqqiq. Muhaqqiq is the guy who basically, he goes out, he finds the manuscripts, because obviously, how do the texts get printed? We have to first find the manuscript from a library, and then people have to type it up on the computer, and then they print it out, right? So that's what the muhaqqiq's job is. The typist would type out the book, relying on some old print of it. The muhaqqiq would type out a half-page biography of the author, and all of a sudden you have a nice, sleek new print. So, this muhaqqiq is supposed to do academic work. He's supposed to look at the manuscripts, compare manuscripts, find out if the manuscripts have errors, which is more authentic than the other, which is more earlier, which has been written by the author himself or by direct students of the author, things like that. That's the job of a muhaqqiq. But what these publishing houses do, people who they just want to make a profit, they would get the typist, people who would type super fast, who can type Arabic super fast. They would type out the book, relying on some old print of it. So the book was previously published, but it was an old print. It's not like a modern print. So the research scholar, instead of doing actual academic research, he would just write a half-page biography of the author, and then the typist would just type out the book, and then suddenly you have a nice new print. Okay. They then realized that customers were getting cleverer, more clever, and then they would only buy muhaqqaq. Muhaqqaq meaning research, revised, and properly edited prints. Because if you're buying a book, why you don't want to buy it with mistakes? You're buying it because you actually want to know what the author is trying to say in the most accurate manner possible. Okay. So they had to start outsourcing the tahqiq, the verification process. In other words, if Dar al-Kutub al-Ilmiya, DKI, decided they needed to print al-Mabsut of al-Sarakhsi, which is a famous Hanafi text, they would take their old reliable print, hand it over to their group of typists, who in a few days would have it ready in a text document, complete with thousands of errors, thousands of mistakes, linguistic mistakes, grammar mistakes, added free of charge, right? Of course, no rechecking or correction would take place. So, level of scholarship, huh? It would then be handed over to a muhaqqiq. In the case of al-Mabsut, Muhammad Hassan ibn Ismail al-Shafi'i, okay, he is the one who did the tahqiq, the verification for this book al-Mabsut, printed by DKI. He would then make a long-drawn takhrij of every hadith in the book. So, he would try to source the different hadiths, as-Sarakhsi uses in the book, and also made takhrij of some of the fiqhi quotations. So then he would, trace back some of the quotes, the citations used by as-Sarakhsi. So he would do some of that stuff, which is kind of good, but he's not doing the hard work, right? He wouldn't touch or research the typed out muharraf, distorted matan, the text, except very rarely. The whole purpose of the muhaqqiq is so that he can ascertain with exact precision and authenticity what the author is trying to say. For example, sometimes when you get different manuscripts, Sheikh Bashar Awad, he talks about this, when he was doing tahqiq, when he was doing verification of at-Tamheed of Ibn Abdul Barr, he realized that between manuscripts there was huge differences. Sometimes paragraphs would be missing. And the reason this happened was because one manuscript was written when Imam Ibn Abdul Barr, just published the book. And the other one was written just before he died. And there is a difference in paragraphs. So what does that mean? What does that tell you? That means that Imam Ibn Abdul Barr, before he died, made some big changes and edits to his book. And that is the whole purpose of why the muhaqqiq needs to do tahqiq of the book, verification, editing of the book, right? But what this guy over here, Muhammad Ismail al-Shafi'i, hafidhahullah, may Allah preserve him, instead of doing the actual, producing a high quality work of this important fiqh text in the Hanafi madhab, al-Mabsut of al-Sarakhsi, he would just do, he would just go on Maktaba Shamila, some online website, find out the hadith, okay, it's in Bukhari, Abu Dawood, this, that, done. And then takhrij of fiqh quotations. So, Imam Nawawi said this in this book, in that book. It's Maktaba Shamila. It's very easy, very easy. But he didn't actually give us the proper text. The text contains so many errors, thousands of errors, thousands of mistakes, right? He didn't actually do any academic tahqiq ilmi work. Okay, so once he was finished with this, the book would then be handed back to Dar al-Kutub al-Ilmiya, who would typeset it and print it as a طبعة جديدة محققة ملونة, new critical revised colored edition. Right? No changes were made, no actual work was being done, no rigorous academic effort was put into the text, and they would just publish it on the market. New critical revised colored edition. طبعة جديدة محققة ملونة. Okay. That was their old habit. For the last few years, however, they had to improvise as they realized customers checked the front of the book to see if the makhtutat means the manuscripts, were relied upon in the tahqiq. So what did they do now? Well, they either openly lied by putting pictures of some makhtutat at the beginning and saying we relied upon these. So they would say that we relied upon these manuscripts from from Egypt, from Al-Azhar library, from Madinah al-Munawwara, the library over there, from Chesterbery Library in Ireland, right? And in other places, in other big libraries across the world. They would just put pictures of those manuscripts, but they wouldn't actually use them. They wouldn't actually use them, right? So they just lied, or they would play with words and say these are the copies of the makhtutat of this book, without saying they relied upon them. So just play word games, right? But instead giving you that impression. So they're giving you the impression that, oh no, we put in a lot of effort sourcing the different manuscripts for this book and printing the book with high quality editing, with a high quality editing process and all of these things. But they just lied. They just lied. And Muhammad Hassan al-Shafi'i, right? So if you see his name on a book, you already know he's dodgy. Is really famous for doing this. He has made tahqiq of dozens of books in this manner. Don't ever buy a book with his name on the cover. Okay. Yeah. So this we read about half of this email. Inshallah, in the next session we will continue talking about the very sad status quo of Islamic publishing houses and how books are published without any amana ilmiya, without any academic integrity. Nas'alullah salama. Jazakallah khair all for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode where we discuss the rest of this and this topic in detail. Wa alaikum assalam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.